When you begin most games, you might first see some kind of opening cutscene or montage that helps to set up what it is you'll be playing. These can range from openings that are there purely to psych you up for what's ahead, to introductions that give you some important information before starting the game. Perhaps even acting as a short prologue, like in the case of Silent Hill. And while there are plenty of games that do this sort of thing brilliantly, it's hard to find a better example than Metal Gear Solid. After the opening logos, you're immediately introduced to the world of Metal Gear via an introductory cutscene setting up Solid Snake's mission into Shadow Moses. And while it's setting up some key elements of the story like the setting, antagonists, and Snake's role, it manages to maintain an elusive quality. Snake is shown in many shots, but his face is obscured by swimming gear. There's also the fact that the whole opening takes place underwater, with the murky haze giving the scene an odd sense of calm and tranquility. Through voiceover from Colonel Campbell, we also get mentions of Big Boss and Foxhound, which you'd understand the relevance of if you'd played Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. But even these mentions pose some pretty big questions, especially if you've never played the first two games. Strictly speaking, you don't need to know much more than what this opening tells you to start the game. In fact, I'd wager that most players saw this scene and were pumped to start playing. But Metal Gear Solid hides its true introduction on the main menu underneath the briefing section. And it's here that we have one of my favorite things in the Metal Gear franchise.
It's been a long time, Snake.
I should have known you were behind this, Colonel.
That's no way to greet an old war buddy, Snake.
A series of short scenes that gives you a ton of information and context for what's about to happen in the game, all the while giving us a closer look at the kind of character Solid Snake truly is. In total, the briefing tapes last for 23 minutes and 57 seconds, and within that time, they're able to perfectly set up Metal Gear Solid. They give you answers to nearly all the possible questions you could have, and greater context for characters like Solid Snake, the man himself, and Big Boss, the series' previous central antagonist. These tapes also let us know who we're up against and what's at stake should Snake fail the mission. They're able to set up everything perfectly, and frankly, that's incredibly impressive. There is a lot of information needed to set up the story of Metal Gear Solid. We have to cover Snake, his background, the history of Big Boss and Outer Heaven and Zanzibar Land, introduce Colonel Campbell, Naomi Hunter, introduce each of the villains of Foxhound and the Genome Army. They then have to explain what the Genome Army is, their weapons, why they've turned against the government, and to top it off, the tapes then have to be presented in such a way that they perfectly encapsulate some of Metal Gear Solid's core themes. It's a lot of information that they need to work through, and it's easy to imagine these tapes coming across as boring, long-winded, or downright sloppy with the way they deliver all of this. But somehow, they don't. And that's all down to a few key factors. First and foremost, the sheer quality of the briefing tapes comes down to the competence of the writing.
Most of them were from a merc agency that I think you're familiar with. They were part of Big Boss's private guard. And after Big Boss went down, the military just bought out all their contracts.
Outer Heaven.
After that, they were merged with our own VR unit, Force 21, and retrained. If you ask me, these so-called next-generation special forces should be called simulated soldiers. They have no real battle experience.
Video game players, huh?
Jeremy Blaustein acted as Metal Gear Solid's localizer, and we can credit most of the smoothly written English dialogue to him. Exposition is expertly crafted to not sound monotonous, something that's a very hard thing to do, especially when there's so much information to get across. Even the more technical terms and abbreviations for the militaristic language come across as cool rather than awkward and dull.
Anyone going with me?
As usual, this is a one-man infiltration mission.
Weapons and equipment OSP?
Yes, this is a top-secret black op. Don't expect any official support.
The voice acting also needs to be commended here. David Hayter, Paul Eading, and Jennifer Hale all do such a good job in these tapes. Snake sounds angry, frustrated, yet interested to know about what's going on. And when he agrees to take part in the mission, There's confidence in the delivery that hints at Snake's prior experience. Colonel Campbell manages to sound both threatening and friendly to Snake, clearly fulfilling his role of controlling Snake and getting him to cooperate in the mission, but you can tell that there's that spark of friendship between them that keeps the conversation engaging. Then there's Naomi Hunter, whose lighter tone contrasts so well with the two gruff dudes in the middle trying to sound the coolest. Together, their performances manage to pull you into the scene, and it's work that I feel often goes unpraised. When the scenes need to explain more intricate things to you, like why the Genome soldiers decided to revolt, the writing doesn't simply list off the information like a checklist. Snake asks questions and pokes in deeper to figure out what's really going on, and that simple action makes the scene far more engaging, even if the end result would be the same if Campbell just droned on and on. Here it feels like a genuine conversation between people, if I had to put it plainly. And remember that this game came out in 1998, a time when video games didn't necessarily have the best written voice dialogue for long scenes like this. The other aspect that makes these tapes so enjoyable is their length. In total, this is around 24 minutes of story to get through, and that may seem like a lot to someone who just wants to play the game. Thankfully, each part of the briefing is its own tape that can be played and replayed individually, so if you just want to watch a handful of these to clear up a question you may have, you can do just that. Or maybe you want to re-watch a tape to clarify some information you didn't quite get. Each tape only lasts for 1 to 2 minutes apiece, which isn't very long at all. And again, it's impressive that they managed to deliver as much information in such a small time span. And since all of our attention spans are non-existent now, it's good that these tapes don't waste time with dead air or overly long scenes. Each tape is perfectly paced, and it makes them a joy to re-watch again and again. There's also a secret order to the tapes that you may not notice if you aren't looking out for it. You may assume that the tapes are already in order by the way they're laid out in the menu, but I'm sorry, you'd be wrong. In each tape, there's a timer slowly ticking up in the top left corner, since this is footage being recorded by a security camera. And if you go by the usual order of the tapes that the menu gives you, you'll notice that the timer jumps around a lot. Now, knowing this isn't necessary to understand the tapes, since they're all self-contained anyway, but it's a neat detail and one that feels good to figure out. But more than anything else that I just described, the reason that the briefing tapes work so well is the visual style used to create them. They are unlike anything else in the game visually. Cutscenes are rendered with the game's 3D models, and the Codex portraits, while brilliantly done in their own right, aren't quite as expressive as what we have here. So just from a basic visual standpoint, the briefing tapes manage to stand out all on their own, which is incredibly important because it helps to distinguish their purpose as a sort of add-on to the overall experience. The mood created by the visuals in the briefing is cold and mysterious, and the fact that it's viewed through the lens of a security camera immediately gives off the vibe that Snake isn't really here willingly. The man just wants to be at home with his huskies, for God's sake. It also manages to dehumanize Snake, which lends itself to the idea that the government just views him as a tool and weapon, something they can just push into a situation to have it resolved. It's a subtle nod to a major twist that happens right at the end of the game, where Snake finally figures out the truth behind all of Shadow Moses. The lighting is also brilliant too. Stark lighting only shows off parts of Snake in each of the shots, with most of his core features being silhouetted in wider shots, and his face only being clearly visible in a close-up. All the while, Snake's surroundings are barely lit at all, making it hard to tell where he even is. For the most part, all of these angles are still images, with very light bits of animation here and there. Snake may tilt his head to look at whoever's speaking, and in close-ups, his mouth moves whenever he speaks. It's incredibly simple animation, but that combined with the use of the hazy security camera breathes so much life into the scene. This visual style is one of the strongest aspects of the briefing tapes, and it's a textbook example of how less is more. Nothing crazy or bombastic happens in any of these tapes, but the careful and calculated approach to writing, acting, and animating each of these created something truly impressive. And they also function perfectly on a replay of the game, to help you get back into the story and perhaps answer some questions that confused you on a previous playthrough. From start to finish, the briefing tapes are such a huge mark of quality for what amounts to be an entirely optional part of the game that isn't even necessary to understand the storyline. It combines everything that makes Metal Gear Solid as special as it is. Incredible writing, an enthralling tone that gets the player to really engage with what's going on. Everything that makes this game good can be seen from just these tapes alone. And it's something everyone should watch before their mission into Shadow Moses begins. I'd personally be really interested to know how many players actually watch these tapes before playing the game. I know I didn't when I first played Metal Gear Solid, but I'd say that they have plenty of value either way. So, if you've never taken the 23 minutes and 57 seconds to watch through them all, I'd heavily recommend you do so. Who knows? They might even get you to boot Metal Gear Solid up one more time.